Hello, everyone. I am Isaiah Jacobs, and I'm sitting here with Christina Tracer. Mrs. Tracer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
You have been a part of the fandom for quite a few years now, and and we're just gonna sort of do three consecutive interviews over the next few weeks, going in chronological order of the novels you have released, starting with Child of Man.
Oh
Could
God.
you
Okay.
could you please tell us a little bit about this novel?
So, Child of Man was my first project of any real size. It's set in a slightly altered modern day urban fantasy uh, realm, roughly around Denver, based on the idea of modern day werewolves and other shapeshifters as protectors of nature and all of that good stereotypical happy stuff. I should note I started this thing when I was 18, so you know, treat it you know with that in mind. And an industrial accident poisons one of the members, uh, leading the local shaman to search outside his community for a cure. Unbeknownst to him, there are other forces at foot. Uh, this accident was no accident, as they say, and there are other forces that are seeking to stop them from finding out what happened. And enter uh, Alex Demont, a technical analyst at a company, who is a self indoctrinated spiritualist into things mystical and shamanism that ends up getting caught in the crossfire between these two groups. Um, and the novel sort of evolves from there. And if I say too much more, I'll give away the ending.
All
And I
right,
don't.
I got you. Yeah, and we'll be trying to steer clear away from that. But you say that you wrote this when you were 18. Do you how long was it until the story was actually published?
Oh God. So I started, and perhaps this will give a little bit of background. Also, uh, I found the internet in 1993, 92, something like that, and was on Usenet of all places, uh, in a little pocket realm called Alt Horror Werewolves, way, way back in the day, which was full of mystical shaman type folks, the ancestors to the modern Therian or otherkin movement. For those who understand what those terms are, and we had group role play and chat and what have you back in the day, and I started writing this when I was, it would have been 1994, and then at one point it sat on a shelf 2/3 of the way finished for the better part of 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And I finally pushed it to completion in 2008. I think it actually spent 14 years in development. I had been sitting on it waiting to figure out how I wanted to wrap things up, and looking for I was a novelist in search of an audience. Back then Sofa Wolf didn't do novels and Fur Planet didn't exist. And so it just kind of sat and languished for ages. And I finally pushed it through to the end, and then said, all right, I'm polishing it and calling it done here in, I think, 2008 is actually when I finished it and published it.
And what would you say was the most difficult thing when you were approaching, or well, not approaching, but what was the most difficult thing in trying to finish this novel and get it published? What was the biggest obstacle for you?
The biggest obstacle was internal. One of the things I've long lamented is that the furry fandom is first and foremost a visual community. Um, its art and its artists have always been the draw for the fandom. That's not to say that writing doesn't have its place, but it has always been a second class citizen of the furry community simply because it's harder to get into and it's harder to get something out of. Art is something that can be appreciated very quickly. This is not to say that there's no depth to art, that there's no meaning. Artists can slave away at pieces for months, weeks, years, and still not be finished and put incredible amounts of love into a piece. But the average non producer of artistic goods can pick up a piece of art and have a visceral reaction to it in moments. And that kind of payoff is very quick and it's very gratifying. And so that's been the focus of the fandom. Writing takes more effort to put in. You actually have to sit and analyze what you're reading. And so it takes more to get out. It's a lot more like strip mining than just surface skimming. You really have to dig into things. And so there's never been a big writing tradition in the fandom, at least back from that era. And none of this matters a hill of beans because I should have been saying, well, I can create this. But the fact of the matter was, what blocked me was the sense that I was screaming into a void. That there was nobody, there wasn't a Fur Planet or a Sofa Wolf. We were just beginning to get furry comics, and standalone novels were a fantasy. Nobody was doing it. And so there was the sense that even if I finished it, it wouldn't have an audience. And it wasn't until the late 2000s when I started seeing names like Kyle Gold and K.M. Hirosaki and Renee Carter Hall and Micah Hogarth actually getting successes in putting out long form fiction that I started saying maybe I can be part of this again. And of all things, my wife started writing this web serial, 13 Ribbons, and the feedback she was getting on that was phenomenal compared to what I was unable to, or compared to what I was used to seeing people do for anything long form writing. And believe it or not, it was jealousy that kicked me over to say, well, damn it, if she's getting all this attention for that, surely I can finish something by now.
And looking back after 5 years of its initial release, are you happy with the attention it's gotten so far?
Um, that's a loaded question. That's the one book that I've put out myself. It hasn't been through anyone else. And I'm a writer. I'm not a salesperson. So the fact that what I get is satisfaction in knowing that it's done, in knowing that I finished it and that I gave it the best love I could given its rather youthful premise. And I feel good about what I did with it, but it's still kind of the lonely child of the stable.
Fair enough. To go back to an earlier comment, you said it's true that Son of Man or Child of Man?
Child of Man.
Child of Man, yes, my mistake. Child of Man is indeed very heavy into shamanism. It plays a very heavy role in this story, and I
Hmm.
understand that you yourself are a shaman. What is your interest in shamanism?
Oh, lordy. So, I'm going to play this one with a straight face, and you decide where you've heard enough. I have always, since I was knee high to everything and everyone, been fascinated by shapeshifters. Um, and as I said, when I got into uh, Usenet, and I ran into that group that I mentioned, the Therian prototype ancestor community. Um, I was somewhat on the periphery of that, and part of the community on the edges. And then out of nowhere, I had one of the members approach me and say, "I had a dream about you," and that doesn't usually happen. So now that I've had a specific dream involving you, we need to sit and have a talk, and you need to stop treating this like a role playing exercise and see if there's some meat here on this particular conversation. What are you interested in? And because I've been given clear instructions to bring you into the fold. And this caught me so completely off guard and out of the blue that I panicked. I had no idea what to say. And in moments of quiet reflection, I probably did the best thing I could, and I said, I have absolutely no idea. Since then, I have had what I can only refer to as shamanistic visitations, visions, something. On a couple of occasions, they are extremely rare. One of my personal interests in both writing and life is the notion of the transcendent experience, the moments in which everything comes together. Uh, when one feels like one is in touch with something greater than self, if such a thing can be truly imagined. I won't call it religion because you can have that sense and still be wholly humanistic and say that you are part of the universe, or you are the universe, or you are in control of your own universe, or however you want to approach it. But many people might understand it best as touching the face of God. And I've had a number of those experiences along the way. Far fewer than I would like, perhaps, but at the same time, I think if I had too many more of them too often, it would lessen the impact. Um, the first one of these was when I was 22 or so, and Bear caught me unawares and said, "You need to stop pretending to be one of my children. Um, I've guided you as far as I can, but from here you're on your own." And to say that the first time one speaks with a goddess is to have her tell you to go away was perhaps one of the most soul crushing moments of my life, but it was sufficiently inspiring to lead me to seek out other forms of that connection, other identities, other ways of interacting with the divine, I guess you would say. And I have had it a few more times since then, discovering Rabbit. Um, one when I was on the verge of suicide in the middle of what I love to describe as the bad. I had an 8-month period of unemployment at one point, and near the end of that, I was broke. I had just wrecked my car. Several other things had gone wrong. I'd had a roommate commit suicide not too long prior for reasons I don't really want to dive into too deeply.
Fair enough.
And I was sitting in a rental car thinking, I could just drive this thing into the Schuylkill and that would probably be the easiest path from here. And in that moment, I felt the presence of Bear again and several others. And I basically got asked, "Do you understand the joke?" Not in words, of course. These things never happen in words. That would be too easy. It's not like I'm hearing voices, but it was just a sense of wondering if I understood what I was supposed to get out of this. And it was such a strange and phenomenal moment that I couldn't help but laugh. And I drove home and I told Jesse about this. And the next day, I got a phone call offering me a job for more money than I'd ever made in my life. Um, and the, you know, where the average person says coincidence, the mage says uh, synchronicity. And, you know, consciously I can look at this and understand that this is a fascinating series of odd events that have nothing to do with one another. But putting on the mystic fancy hat and saying these things are connected and there is a chain of events here um, gives them a power. And drawing on that for inspiration and motivation has been a great source of strength in my life.
Well, that definitely sheds a lot of light on many aspects in childhood, man, that we will be touching on in here in just a moment. But before we get to that, you say that when you were summarizing the story, you mentioned how a new era of, or well, a new generation of werewolf, a modern day werewolf, and how it's the protector of nature, and how there's some sort of uh, threat on nature
Mm-hmm.
from man. Uh, what inspired you to write out this conflict in this manner?
So, another writer that I greatly admire, Ben Goodridge, lives in Maine and was present for one of the greatest oil spills to ever happen in the area. I forget the name of the ship, but uh, the oil slick was an ecological devastation. This would have been in '94, I think it was. And his emotional catalyst for dealing with the pain of what had happened and seeing this ecological devastation was to ascribe narrative substance to this accident. It was an accident. Let's start with that. We all understand there was no malice intended. It was just a disaster. But that's the kind of random act of cruelty that somebody who is an ecologist and an environmentalist has a hard time dealing with, in the same way that people have a hard time dealing with random acts of violence in the street. We want to ascribe motive to make somebody to make it from I shot a dude because I was bored or his hair was the wrong color, to turn it into some kind of story that makes blame and restitution and grief easier to manage. So when this oil spill happened, Ben wrote 100,000 words on a story called The Wreck of the Amanda K, which sort of laid the groundwork for this werewolves versus werewolves as nature's protectors against the forces of an uncaring and unfeeling humanity that, craves the artificial and the man-made and the concrete and glass and steel, and set up this really neat this pair of poles to play off against each other right around the same time that White Wolf was releasing Werewolf the Apocalypse. And for anybody who's familiar with that particular role-playing system, it's very much the same conflict. And this probably wouldn't have been too far from the era of Captain Planet and the Planeteers on TV. So there was this late 90s earnestness to, we must save the environment, we must save the planet, we are the defenders of nature against terrible things. And all of these influences were floating in the background when I began to write, to try to process a lot of my own feelings towards the community I was in and the community that I was just on the verge of leaving, because Usenet as a medium of interaction was dying. It's not dead, obviously, it's still going strong today, but that particular community was giving way to IRC and forums and the web, and we were beginning to drift apart, and each of us to go find our own places. And this was sort of a clarion call to not forget what we had built together and where we had come from.
You paint a very interesting conflict for your novel here between nature and man and werewolves. Uh, but it becomes especially difficult for one character in the novel more so. I'm not going to give away details. I'm not going to spoil it, but I will say that for one character, this uh, tension between nature and man becomes so violent and it becomes violent and close to each other that they sort of blur. Again, not trying to give it away, but why did you decide on this huge revealing plot point with the conflict of nature and man intertwining and blurring?
One of the things that I have always, I could talk about the Jungian shadow or the collective unconscious, but the idea that we are our own worst enemy, that the things we do unthinkingly or unawares that set ourselves up for disaster, the conflict, in the same way that casually leaving, the old pratfall of, the guy who eats the banana and casually throws away the peel later ends up slipping on it, the Chekhov's gun of uh, slapstick in that sense. What I wanted from the outset was the sense that if we could have been honest with ourselves, if only we could have seen all sides of the story from the beginning, there would have been no conflict. That the tension and the conflict and the confrontations all come from not knowing everything. That if we had been being blessed with perfect vision, we could have found a path out of this that didn't lead to violence. But because we don't have that, and we are forced to stumble through the shifting viewpoints of the story, and we are forced to shift through the evolving understanding of the characters, we have no choice but to work through this from a very human level, to engage in the fight only to find out later that it wasn't what we thought it was. The nature of the conflict was not what we thought at the beginning.
Okay, okay, I see. Moving on, there are two characters in specific that I want to reflect on real quick. Them being Alex and Briar. Uh, Alex, this human who you mentioned briefly at the beginning, he's heavily into shamanism, and he has this sort of spiritual animal totem as a bear. And then there's Briar, who is similar to these werewolves, but she is in fact a child of rabbit, and she takes on the form of a rabbit. And
Mm.
earlier, you mentioned these two personas, a bear and a rabbit. Are Alex and Briar reminiscent of these figures?
I, more so than I would probably like to open. Well, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Longer answer gets into how much of every character in any story being a facet of self. Um, Many greats will tell you write what you know, and these tensions between wanting to, Briar is that part of me that would love nothing more than to walk away from everything and go live as an animal in the woods, to experience nature as part of it, the almost the near willingness to be the animal as distinct from the person. uh Shadow Dance, the werewolf who gets sick, represents in many ways the cause out the what happens to people when they turn their backs on some part of themselves. This is I walked away from this, and it burned me. I wasn't ready for it. Alex is manifests the sense that even as I am exploring my own spirituality and getting deeper into my own mythos, I remain separate from it. I Because I can talk about these things from the perspective of the cold rationalist and the spiritualist and the anthropologist and the sociologist, and I can wear these different hats, it means that I'm not wholly engaged with any of these viewpoints. The point of a reality tunnel, the goal of any given reality tunnel, is to get far enough down that you forget you're in one. Because that's the point at which the magic really happens, because you genuinely believe without question when the miracles occur, when water turns to wine, when lead turns to gold. I can't do that. I can get far enough down to understand the miracles and to experience them in context, but I still have one hand on the handrail saying, tomorrow I'm going to look at this from another light, and I'm going to see the trick of the light and the sleight of hand that let me substitute pyrite for, this lead ingot. And understanding the trick stops me from being able to fully embrace it. And that conflict is Alex's conflict of knowing how he gets into his situations, he can't fully embrace them. And ultimately, by the end of the book, reconciling that is what allows him to then actually embody his spirit. It's the point at which he is no longer bothered by the fact that he's not one of them, is what finally lets him become one.
And this conflict between, well, this initial apprehension between Alex and Briar sort of symbolizes the difference in their archetypes, if you will.
Yes.
Okay, okay, I see. To go on a bit of a tangent and a lighter note, when I first read the little dream sequence when Alex in his bear form first met Briar, I totally thought there was going to be a romantic subplot with them. Had you considered that, or did you know that there was going to be no romance between them?
I had intended. It's funny. I waffled on that through the entire story. I imagine that off camera and out of sight, there is a romance between them that is evolving that has only just come into the frame by the end of the book. I didn't feel like enough time and enough circumstance had passed to justify throwing them into a romance. And as I reached about chapter 12, I felt like if I drag it on long enough to justify putting one in there, I'll have really stretched this book past the point at which it naturally should have closed out. So if there is ever a sequel to it, and I do leave myself room in the end for a sequel, that is almost certainly one of the aspects that I will have to tackle is the budding romantic tension there. But I in my mind it's happening, but it's not explicit in the book.
Okay. Okay, I got you. Fair enough. Uh, Another thing I wanted to touch on was this spirit realm in which Alex occasionally enters as his bear form, and and it becomes a bigger plot device. Well, I don't want to say plot device, but it becomes very relevant later on in the novel. Could you please explain to us this spiritual realm that the characters enter?
So as I envision it in my own head, there is the mindscape of any given individual, which is the realm in which your own thoughts and your own dreams and your own fantasies all take place. If there are recurring places in your dream realm, then these are all part of the internal landscape of your own head. And then there is the landscape itself, which is the spiritual embodiment of the place you're the physical world. Again, referencing Werewolf the Apocalypse, it would be the equivalent of the Umbra, I suppose, the shadow reflection, or Plato's realm of forms, wherein we see the land in its idyllic state. Um, and then there's this blendy sort of concept that I like to refer to as the soulscape, which is the place where all of these things overlap depending on who is present and what has been going on and how deeply any one person is motivated to manipulate the land itself. And so pushing into one's own dreams internally would be diving deeper into one's own soulscape, but there wouldn't necessarily be anyone else around. Lovers might enter into each other's visions um, in this idealized fantasy realm, but it would be wholly removed from the physical. The act of uh, becoming a protector, as Shadow Dance does or had before the story began, meant that his mindscape was the landscape. This is where all of his dreams happen. This is where he himself, as a spiritual being, exists, is in this idealized vision of the physical world that he inhabits, which is why it becomes this twisted wreck when it gets poisoned.
Okay, okay, I see. And would you say that this sort of goes back to the theory of the collective unconscious?
It would definitely touch on it. It's another one of those pieces of psychology that I have read along the way and extracted nuggets from. Um, I definitely owe something to that idea.
Okay, okay, I gotcha. Now that we've gone into detail about the concepts of these bear and rabbit characters, I'm going back and I'm looking at the cover for the novel, and it features Alex and Briar by the river, and Alex is bandaging Briar's leg. And I can't help but feel that there is some deep symbolism in there. Is there symbolism?
Um, you would have to ask the artist, John Asher. I gave him the chunk of the book and said, "This is the scene that I want painted for the cover," and he did a beautiful job of it. Um, what I wanted to get out of that scene and out of that was the sense of this is as much Alex coming to terms with being separate as he is becoming part. This duality of state, where he is visibly tending to a member of this thing this community of whom he very desperately wants to be a member and wants to be part, even as he is coming to terms with the fact that he is never going to be that. And yet it's the act of reconciliation that allows him to do so, that allows her to trust him enough to let him tend to her in that fashion. And so it's not really meant to be symbolic outside of that, but it is definitely supposed to be um emblematic of the of Alex's tension in the book.
Okay, okay, I see. Overall, what would you say that you are the most proud of with this novel?
Honestly, I think what I'm most proud of is the fact that I didn't quit. It took me 14 years, lots of false starts, and very little community support to get from where I was when I was 18 to where I was when I finished it. And in that time, I changed a lot, and the book changed a lot, and my relationship with the book changed quite a lot from the the thing that was going, it started life as, my vision for a resurgence, or maybe just a surgence because there wasn't really a re at that point, of a writing tradition in the fandom, to the albatross around my neck that I couldn't get rid of, to the failed fantasy that was never going to go anywhere, to my own peace with having written it. And it's not my best work by far. It's my first novel, and its premise is shaky. Let's be blunt. I started it when I was 18 and full of piss and vinegar. But the fact that I made it through to the end and I had a finished product at the end that I could look back at and say, for all of its faults and for all the things that I know are wrong in its execution, I'm still proud of having done it. I'm still proud of having completed it. I would do it very differently today if I were to take it and rewrite it from scratch. But as it is in its current form, I am still proud that it exists.
All right, well, I believe that is all I have for you today for this story, Mrs. Tracer. Thank you so much for joining me,
Oh, yeah,
and I look forward to having you back on the show to discuss Beautiful World.
good. I look forward to it.